is this AI? I think it's an interesting topic. I think that AI is touching so many aspects of life that it's hard to sort of get your head wrapped around it, but that's why we have a fantastic panel here to explain and talk about generative AI, specifically for folks who are in the UX design space. So I'm going to introduce our panelists. Nikita is going to be moderating, so feel free to come over and grab a seat. Josh Nord, who's just at Razorfish and also has been at United and Accenture. Yanni Roy, who is at Truist Bank, and Bethany is at Slalom. So I'm going to hand it over to them, and I'm going to pass out some mics.
A great round of applause for Lon. Thank you so much, Lon. He actually flew from Florida just for this event, and it was really nice of him. And I want to say thank you to Professor Steele and DePaul University for sponsoring our pizzas and drinks tonight. So thank you very much. All right, let's get started with our today's topic. I'm so excited to be here and very excited to hear from our awesome panelists about what they think of generative AI. When I thought of this topic, just a little bit of background about me. I've been local in Chicago for the last 20 years, and I currently work at Amazon, and I head up design for Alexa. And that's where generative AI kind of topic came in, and I'm like, okay, maybe it's and I haven't heard a design community event happening in Chicago, so Lon and I got together, like, hey, you want to do something, let's do something. I think this topic is very close to me just because I've been working in this industry for a while, and now generative AI topic is going everywhere. So I wanted to kind of bring that to the surface, try to learn a little bit more from other leaders on what they're thinking about generative AI, how they're approaching it, etc. So thought, not only why should I only be the beneficiary of this, we should actually share this. So that's the reason for this. As far as the topic designing for generative AI is concerned, I mean, where do I start, right? Last November, we saw the surge of ChatGPT come in, and it kind of blew everyone's mind with what it can do. But actually, AI has been in generation for a long time. It's just now it has actually picked up the market, and now it has actually gotten mainstream to say, hey, we can actually do a lot more things with generative AI. Now, if you think about generative AI, in the beginning, it was all about LLM models and engineering models and all of that. But now that it has picked up mainstream, the question really is, how does UX industry and design specifically and research should try to work from designing for AI standpoint? So now, are we designing for our designers? Are we designing for AI models? Or are we designing for our end users? That is a question, and a $1 million question, if anybody can answer it. I'm hoping these panelists will be able to answer these questions. So let's get started. I would like to actually pass on to Josh and start with an introduction and a little bit opening statement about how come you're here and what interests you about generative AI.
Thank you, Nikita.
Yep, this one.
Yep.
It's on? Okay. First of all, great to see everyone coming out. I feel like it's been a decade since we were all together. So this is very exciting just to be a part of this. So within that, just a little bit about my background. I think Lon maybe called me up here because I had worked with floppy drives at one point in my life. So I have been around the block a few times. I've been in the design industry for about 20 years. Born and raised in Chicago, and went to design school at Sept College of Art and Design, and have spent a good part of my career since then just continuously being curious, right? As I think as designers, that's just our natural rallying cry, right? So started early on just coding websites and getting into web design, essentially from there. I had been working for some post-production houses early on, but just naturally found myself getting more and more into user experience. At one point, I was at Accenture in a very fledgling group. There was one of like 10 or 11 of us that we were basically forming the first agency-like approach at Accenture. Everything up until then, it was just staff augmented. And that happened actually right here in Chicago, FYI, in terms of just the actual foundations of user experience within Accenture. Just a little known fact for some who don't know that. And then we just grew that team out to like 60, 70 people before we acquired Fjord, QE, and then several other teams. And I was there for almost 4 years, leading up a lot of research and user experience work in that space, really helping define that practice more fully. And then I'll skip through, but have spent a good deal of time at United Airlines. I started up the first Ops UX team at United, which was separate than the consumer-facing UX team that was already there. And grew that team out, and then have been at Razorfish for like the last 4 years up until recently. And so recently I'm looking for a new role, but I've been actually working with a startup out of India. A friend of mine actually that was at United Airlines has been teaming up with me to sort of working on a pilot right now. Some of that's actually going to be leveraging artificial intelligence in the construction space and the renovation space. So we are exploring a lot of these topics as well today. So anyway, just very grateful to be here with all of you, and look forward to this panel.
Awesome. Thank you. Thanks for being here.
Yeah.
Yadi?
Hi there, I'm Yadi Arroyo. I've been kind of working freelance since 2011 when I got fired from my agency job. Best thing that could have happened to me, right? Basically, I was forced to work for really cool companies. Like I started working at startups because they could afford to hire me, and also most people wouldn't quit their full-time job to go work 10 hours a week somewhere. But I had no other job, so I'm like, sure. So I started off with a lot of AI type of startups where we would look at transportation and policing, and we use actually one of our subcontractors was subcontracted with Motorola, so doing all that stuff and actually helping them like tokenize a lot of like their mobile data. So it was a really cool experience for not having any, right? So I just kind of joined in, and then from there I leveraged that and got into even more startups. Got into a startup that was social listening, so that's where I really like jumped into like designing for AI, right? And generative AI specifically because the way the tool worked is that we needed to aggregate data in a way that was synthesizable to C-suite, right? So we kind of moved on from there, and then from there I kind of just landed into banking, right? Like I went from like working at startups and doing all this AI stuff to like trying to solve problems at a bigger scale, because that was my goal. Like how can I use this knowledge for good? Right? And a little bit more about me. I have a son with special needs. So to me, AI is super important because AI can be very accessible. It can actually like bring parity and democratize the way we absorb and cognitively like understand information. So from a banking perspective, that's why I'm here, right? I want to be able to make very complex topics easy. And now I'm currently a Truist, right? I work with AI and design for AI. And usually a lot of it is how we were saying, like, who do you design for? For everything, right? Because a lot of my work is for tuning, a lot of it is tuning, right? Like you just have to kind of like adjust and create, right? I even learned how to do Amazon Lex coding. I'm not a coder, but I did it for prototyping. So I've been kind of just accidentally in the field for a while. But that's basically it, Yadi in a nutshell.
Thanks, Yadi. Bethany? Please.
Hi, I'm Bethany Patricic, formerly of Slalom Build. I led the experience design teams in Chicago, Denver, and Detroit. And I've spent the last 2 years hyper-focused in the AI space and thinking about how we coach clients into finding, shaping, and defining valuable, intelligent use cases, and also how we start to incorporate these tools into our design practice, into our discoveries, so we can deliver better, faster, and start not just thinking about improvements for clients, but also how we work. I've been fortunate to work with lots of data science teams and really have enjoyed putting that POV together. And Gen AI really excites me because it's making AI accessible in ways that weren't beforehand. Prior to Gen AI, you needed data science teams. You needed to think about ML ops. You had to build, maintain, monitor for these hyper-specific use cases that can never change and grow Whereas now, we've got tools that you can start to solution out a spectrum with, and you can get immediate results with. So it's really removing those barriers and changing that whole approach to intelligence.
Take that. Sorry. Well, thank you so much, all three of you, for awesome introduction. I am overwhelmed and very excited to ask them a lot of questions. We'll start with our discussion of Q&A with them, and then in the last 10-15 minutes, we're going to take some questions from the audience. So let's get started. So I'm going to start with Josh. Josh, what does generative AI versus generative design mean for you?
Is this on the question list?
Yes.
Okay.
It's the first one.
Wow, thanks. Well, my understanding is the area that we really are looking at is an ability to either instruct or to create. And within that discussion, what we're starting to see now is a larger evolution of that, where we were introducing, early models of ChatGPT, where we were starting to look at, early generations of Mid-Journey, where we could only put in so many prompts, we could only sculpt it in so many ways. And now we're able to get a lot more craft and rigor as to what we want it to be, which is more of the latter, to be able to be more instructive with that. And that's where a lot of this does get very exciting, because certainly opening up Mid-Journey the first time several months ago was, pretty much an eye-opener, right? And yet, where we've seen it quickly elevate in just a matter of months is both exciting and maybe a little scary. I won't get into the discussions with that quite yet, but there is a really profound effort, it appears, to really help humans shape what the generative AI should be, and to another level of that, where we should then further explore opportunities to define it for our own purposes versus just having it be something abstract and beautiful and creative, but not necessarily a tool for us in terms of implicitly giving it what we need from it as well.
So it sounds like we need more structure now than ever to actually design for generative AI.
Yes, absolutely.
Do you have anything to add, Bethany, Eddie?
I would argue we should never be designing for generative AI, where generative AI is a tool. And as we go into this, it can make predictions around what it thinks is the best solution. It can string things together. It can sound intelligent. It can sound human, but it lacks judgment. It lacks creativity, and it only has the context that's directly provided. It is a tool that we as people can use to optimize and enhance our processes. When we think about designing for Gen AI, what we're really talking about is how do we better design prompts? How do we get more articulate? How do we think about describing exactly what we want to train against, and how we're going to coax the machine to once again produce exactly that result we want it to. But the goal is never to think about that as sort of the end product. It's how are you going to optimize that relationship with the tool.
That's really cool.
Yes.
Like you just said, I almost see like generative design is a subset of generative AI, right? Because design is only one dimension. Like what we forget that AI is multimodal. It's abstract. It's a brain, right? It could exist in a kiosk, in an iPad, in a phone, in a bank teller iPad, right? Like, and that's the type of thinking that we do at Truist. Like, we actually think beyond chat, right? Because right now we're working, like what we have is a chat assistant, which is technically AI, right? But, right, what I can't say is like, is it going to be elsewhere? Can it live elsewhere? Is it something that ties all these systems together, right? And to y'all's point, right, we're not designing for generative AI. Generative AI is a tool, right? Now in banking, it's slightly different because there's a lot of regulations, and because of hallucinations, you do not want to give someone the wrong financial information, right? You don't. Additionally, the other safeguards, because I come from an ethics standpoint. I don't want to be anyone's judge, but what I'm saying is I protect the user's data, right? So we have to safeguard them. And also, when you're using generative AI, right, if you're in a regulated environment, sometimes they have to lock your computer because you have access to personal data that you can easily upload and accidentally spread to all those LLMs, right? So I almost feel like generative AI is a tool. Generative design is an outcome, but it's multimodal. So it could actually be generative blank, right? It could be generative audio for blind people. It could be generative like tactile, like haptic response. We haven't even touched the surface of AI, right? We're just doing like, this is what we see under the, above the iceberg. Under the iceberg is where the really cool stuff happens, right? That said, that's kind of my differentiation between generative AI and generative design.
Love it. I love how you both are describing generative AI. I want to just dig a little bit deeper into some of the things what you said, but before I come to you, Yadi, you mentioned a magic word there, you called prompt, right? Mm-hmm. Everyone, I don't know how many of you have heard, but prompt design and prompt engineering, if you haven't, Google it, right? Yeah. I would like to just dive into that. What did you mean by prompt, and can you explain to the audience how should they think about that?
Yeah, so what makes generative, okay, it is on, right?
Yeah.
Okay. What makes generative AI really unique is that it doesn't have a fixed use case. It's not solving just one problem. So it has been trained to understand human language and the way that humans speak. So to get outcomes, it really is as simple as asking a question. And in the Gen AI world, that's called a prompt. So you could use a prompt within ChatGPT to help you create an ecosystem map or service blueprint. You can use a prompt to help you come up with panel questions for a Gen AI talk, right? You could also use prompts to create chemistry equations or images, or even to synthesize data or to create audio pieces. And it really is just framing it as a question. But just like anything, the context within that prompt and the context that the LLM, the algorithm that Gen AI is using has, is really what provides the power of that answer. So you can customize the response length, the tone of voice, to the accessibility points, the education level, and really get specific. You can train it on specific data or citations, but it really is an art form to get those questions to a point where you can ask them and answer them at scale. And as we think about Gen AI and how it goes beyond chatbots, it's really that power of the prompt that makes it special.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you for that. Yadi, you mentioned another magic word I would like audience to learn about is hallucination. Mm-hmm. Can you please explain to the audience, what does that mean?
What do you guys think it is? It's basically when it spews out nonsense, right? The best example, and I love this guy from Truist, so please, tell him I sucked up a little, right? His name is Bjorn, right? And the first time he talked at Truist, I was a believer. I'm like, oh my God, I love this guy. He showed us an example of a hallucination of do cows lay eggs? And ChatGPT did this, all these paragraphs, yes, eggs this, and down to and the egg hatched at the third day. It's really, how would, what? But if you read it, it's so fantastical. It gives a story about how a cow laid an egg and how the egg matured. And I'm like, if I didn't know any better, I would have believed this. But I know better. Cows don't lay physical eggs at all. And then that example kind of stuck in my head because the problems with hallucination is not the ridiculous example, it's the example that you can believe. And that's the dangerous part, right? So that's where ethicists come in and kind of have to there has to be some sort of human oversight sometimes, especially at the critical points, because hallucinations are actually very detrimental if you can't catch them and you can't tune for them.
Would you say hallucination is kind of like a false positive?
Yes, very much so. And it tricks you because the way it reads out, it's very human.
Right.
And if you don't know the subject matter, you can be bamboozled.
Yes.
So yeah, it's horrible.
So what I like about this panel is I actually prepared a kickoff questions, and the green is the deep into the question. I didn't have to use any of that. Now I'm going actually already deep into these questions. The next question is for Josh. Josh, how can we create a generative AI to assist in more creating personalized and adaptive experiences?
Great question. I'm glad you asked me that one. So in the last year, I've spent a good deal of time in the agency space working, especially in personalization, really around a lot of strategy work, creating journey maps, service blueprints, identifying what I describe as pivotal moments in the journey, and really just creating more personalization on a level and scale that is helping clients in this space. And this is a space that I am seeing one of the most tremendous areas of growth in generative AI in terms of whether you're getting through and slicing segmentation data and getting into macro, micro instances of those segments and starting to then connect shopping behavior, buying behavior, all of those different attributes. If you've worked in kind of the marketing space, you know that we very much kind of dial in on these. It's not just about millennials. We really want to get deeper, right? And so up until this point, it's been an enormous undertaking for clients to really either just invest in the amount of work that needs to be done to set this up and then deliver it properly. And I think we've all seen it, right? We've all been we get an email from some brand and it's just like, hey, do you want to buy clothes that are not even anything that you're interested in, or it just is completely taking you off track. And yet generative AI and AI in terms of those models as to where I'm seeing them is really going to take it to another level.
Yeah.
Now we obviously need to have more governance around it. There's definitely some ethical factors, but within that space, if we're doing it well, I think there is a benefit. And we've done some research in this space through our sister agencies, and a lot of the research shows that people, if we do it right, they value it.
Mm-hmm.
If we do it wrong, we're frustrated as hell, and we're just ready to unsubscribe, right? So in that space, that's the area of personalization, and then I think there was a second part to your question.
Adaptive.
Adaptive.
How do we make sure that it's adaptive to the user?
So I won't wax too poetic, but I'm really curious to see if there are going to be opportunities as we get into headless CMS and distributed content and the management of that. We could be a very interesting time as designers, as purveyors, as researchers, and I'm using designers as a very holistic view, architects, whatnot, where we come in and we start to have a better understanding of the types of experiences that we can shape for customers in a way that's way more dynamic than it's ever been, right? We do our best to try to create what is essentially static pages, yes, they're responsive and whatnot, but to be able to get to a point where you can shape that a little bit more, we're already doing that in commerce.
Yeah.
Amazon's clearly the standout there and a model for that, but where we can even take that into other websites that are not even commerce, because we know that people don't just always live in commerce, they want to live in other pages and experiences. And so the way I kind of see that is if you were to take a journey of that relationship, can you chart how people are moving through that experience in a way that is more relevant to their needs and their goals, and then even providing them insights in a way that they don't have to find it, but it gets more surfaced up and delivered to them in a more relevant way.
Awesome. Thank you, Josh. I think you used a word ethics, and I want to kind of talk about that. Bethany, I think you spoke about ethics before. Just want to ask you a question about when designing anything, interfaces or any applications or anything, as a designer, how should they consider ethics when we're designing for generative AI?
Yeah, this is a big topic. So when you think about ethics or responsible AI, I think one of the first things is recognizing your audience is much larger than the end user. I think we also ascribe too much benefit and power to the technology which is the tool, as opposed to holding the product teams effectively that are building these models accountable. So when you think about ethical Gen AI, it's really important to really understand the entire path to value as part of this, because there are humans in every part of that loop. And in order to really be responsible and to feel confident in the solution, you need to be able to make intentional decisions across each and every one of those pieces. When we think about Gen AI, it's made up of algorithms, right? So the technical bits, the statistics bits, it's a programming language. It's fed data, which has been curated by humans and prepared for Gen AI by humans. It's trained using judgment criteria that are created by humans. And that loop continues until they feel like it's sufficient. Once again, a human decision. Then you've got the human element of the prompt. You've got the technology providing the action, and then you have the human responses to those actions. That is an entire system. When we talk about the power of Gen AI and what it can do, when we automate it, we're taking the last human out of the loop. When we use OpenAI's models as opposed to training our own, we're taking the human out, or we're outsourcing the human in the loop and the training piece, right, to the LLM. When we stand up our own instance and a company, we train it on company data. Once again, we're making that intentional decision. So there is bias in all of these pieces. There are bias in today's processes. There are biases in our data. But if you design it intentionally and you go in with those diverse teams and you start off with this plan and you make everything visual so you can include more people into those conversations, that's how you can really enact change.
I love this. And I love how you're describing how each and every system we are designing for is actually a judgment, and we are passing a judgment to do it. I recently learned something interesting. Stanford University is now having design students pair up with law students to learn generative AI and its implications of it. I'm like, wait a second, I've never actually ever thought of law students and design students working together. But actually, it's true. I mean, even in our company, we are now working more with legal counsel just to learn about what ethical consideration needs to be taken into factor, right? Yari, you said something before about accessibility. And I think it kind of goes into some of these biases too, right? Can you give us a little bit of your perspective on how should one design for accessibility when designing for generative AI?
Well, in general, if you're designing for accessibility, get someone with a disability. As a tester, as someone who can influence you, as someone who can sit at the table with the workshops. And if you can't find them, that's fine. Interview someone on the internet. Get inspired by their struggles, right? So my son is disabled, but I don't see him that way. I see him as my son, right? So that's how some people with disabilities see themselves. And it's very insulting to them when they can't do what everybody else does, right? If I'm blind, I can't see a sign, right? Why should I not be able to bank, right? So I will tell you a story about why this is important to me. I was at another big bank, pretty big bank, not tourist, thank God. And I went to Christmas with my mom, who is mostly a Spanish speaker, and she's friends with a blind family, right? They only spoke Spanish, and they didn't have a bank account. They've been trying to get a bank account. They didn't have access to, they just couldn't, right? There was no way for him to navigate a website in English in a language that he did not understand, additionally being blind. So they asked me to speak to their we have this association, they had an association for blind Spanish speakers. My bank actually gag ordered me, they're like, you can't do it. We're being sued because we're not creating accessible products. That's when I decided I didn't want to work there anymore, right? I was like, it might take me a year, 5 years, 10 years, but I'm out of here, right? Because no one's gonna stop me from helping people, right? They're like, you can't even help him. I'm like, how dare you, right? How dare you, right? After that, that's when I started looking at other disabilities, because that's just one. And even then, language isn't a disability, but imagine just being
like able-bodied, but you speak a different language, right? AI could easily solve for that. AI has models for that. Like, there's no reason not to do that. So the reason, and I'll call it Honey, because she's a coworker that flew all the way from like Nashville to hang out with this crowd. But you know, Honey, it's true. Like, we develop based on like the limitations of our users, right? And we know that we currently design for voice and multimodal. So what audience would benefit from that? First of all, blind people. Second of all, situational disabilities. Like, if I'm pregnant, can't walk down the stairs, or I'm holding a baby as I'm holding my phone, I want to use voice command, right? So that's why I think AI is awesome, because we're not limited by the tools we had in the past. Now we can actually incorporate multimodal stuff and let everyone use it, right? So like right now we're limited with generative AI because it's mostly prompt related. So you covered this, right? But what if it was multimodal input, right? What if I didn't have to write something? What if I don't know how to write? What if I, and they currently do this, right? Upload a document, upload a PDF, upload Excel. What if I do an infographic for myself, right? What if I train my own system? And I will tell you, working with a lot of friends, like founders, join AI, one of my friends is already working on that. Like, he's already working on like training models at scale, right? So imagine no code training of prompts where you don't even need prompts, because you don't. Right? We require prompts right now because of our own personal limitations, but the way we try to work at Truist is that, like, why put that on the user, right? Why put that on the user when we can, like, do it in post, as I like to say, do it in post. Once it's in production, you can see where the issues are and then tune the system. That's why, to me, tuning is super important, because you're only as good as how, like, people receive your products, right? So if you can't access something, if you can't recall information, it's just not going to work. That's part of accessibility for me.
I need to open a bank account with Lon, please keep me in check. I'm having such a great time. I will not know 30 minutes are up.
All good. Keep going.
Josh, if you don't mind sharing with our audience on how can designers leverage generative AI to enhance their creative and problem-solving capabilities? Because generative AI is designing for something different now. You're designing for LLM. You're designing prompts for the system. So what can designers and researchers do to still be creative in their field and not be so structured about it? And how do they can actually do problem solving in their field?
Great question. I think
Put your mic up.
I'm having flashbacks here. Growing up in Glendale and being in a children's choir. I'm not going to sing any songs today. I think there are some great opportunities in a nutshell for designers, for researchers in this space, and I think it's just going to get that much more exciting. Of course, also with a word of caution, dangerous, in the way that we utilize it.
Yeah.
Both ethically and for customers and who we're trying to serve, right, the users. But to that point, I think there's some great opportunities. Things that I've been exploring most recently is just building Excel scripts where I can run better data analyses. Most recently with doing like segmentation research to understand where's the value in what customers need, want. I've been heavily involved in commerce recently with clients like Samsung and Stellantis, where we just pour through a lot of data, and it just normally takes days to get into it. And sometimes you're even trying to proof it and check it and verify. And so what we can start to see happening with generative AI and teams is just, I'm not an Excel guru, but just being able to just quickly just pull, like, I want to take you to this tables and summarize it and then, subtract. And the ways it can just create and bring that intelligence for us to apply is very exciting. And within that space, running research, running analyses, and then, of course, even in the design space where you could start, I haven't seen this yet, but I'm hearing, ripples of, talks about, like, what we all know, what we all want to avoid, like dark patterns. Like, can we run analyses on dark patterns to say, oh my gosh, we're missing it. Or to your point, like ADA, where it's like this type is too light for someone who might be colorblind. those are really exciting opportunities for us to look at. And
Can you explain dark patterns to the audience?
Oh, sure, absolutely. In a nutshell, dark patterns are just intentional patterns to try to coerce or help, influence us in a way that we didn't intentionally want to do. It's usually centered around buttons, but it can be involved around hovers, information that's misleading, associative relationships in terms of where the button is to the information being provided. It's all within those pattern relationships, and as designers, we want to be very ethical with that. So that's essentially what dark patterns are in a nutshell. And sometimes we don't even realize that we're even creating these. We with all due intention, we want to be human and we want to be ethical, but sometimes we just make mistakes in either a rush or just not even in the analysis. And yet, when you look at, especially in the ADA space, where someone might be colorblind, they might miss something. That becomes a dark pattern for them, and we don't even realize it. So that's where these get very exciting for us as designers, and I believe that we should be embracing that. We should be the shepherds of AI versus the sheep that get corralled by technology that we can quickly lose control of if we don't get a grasp on it.
Awesome. Thank you, Josh. The next question kind of is on a similar note for Bethany. With generative AI automating tasks, right? How do you see the balance between automation and human creativity?
Yeah, so automation exists on a spectrum, right? And I think whenever I think about roadmaps or how you're prioritizing use cases and the appropriate level of automation, it's effectively a 9-box where you've got the criticalness of the task, how important is it to get right and to do safely, and then you have the level of assistance technology is going to provide. It can, when we think about Gen AI, it can inform, it can summarize articles, it can surface insights, it can prevent errors and pre-fill forms on users' behalf. So it's automating some of those things. It's just being really crisp on what that task and the verb is, right, that it's automating. There's lots of verbs out there. Not all of them are do it for me. All the way to completely not involving sort of human interaction. So as you think about these pieces and designing for AI, it's not something where you want to jump straight into transformation. In order to do it responsibly, you need to be able to solution on a spectrum and think about how you're going to take your audience and your users on that journey. No one wants to go from designing all of their comps and Figma lovingly by hand to pressing a magic button and having a website pop out. Just imagine how disappointed we all are with every WordPress theme that exists, with every Squarespace template. No matter what the robot produces, we are going to be underwhelmed by it. That is our role of designers. So no matter what happens there, we're always going to be ahead of it. Those machines are going to be trained on those new designs, and it's going to keep coming forward. But it's not something that you can just jump into. In order to safely automate, once again, you have to think about how you can inform, and then you might think about how you can assist. And from there, perhaps you do go ahead and do the action on behalf of the user, but you allow them to change it so it's not committed, right? So anyone that jumps straight and to do that for me without all of the right context and understanding is going to fall flat on their face. No one's going to use the product twice.
I love this because it kind of gives me a segment into a newer topic, which is AI error recovery, right? Yari, I wonder if you have an experience and can speak about when users are, AI fails for them. When AI fails, and AI is like, That's not what I asked for. You're giving me the wrong answer. How can designers design something where they can hopefully save their product and help AI, help user recover those errors quickly?
I love that question. I live in the recovery zone, right? Whether I want to or not. Like I don't, because my whole life is outliers, right? So like the experience is judged by how your worst experience is, right? So to kind of like try to succinctly put it into an answer, you have to think of the worst case scenario and plan for it. I feel that right now there's a lot of fixes going on behind the scenes that we as consumers don't have access to, right? So I'm going to talk to what I think those people are working on, and then you guys tell me whether you guys validate it or not, right? But I think that's where real-time learning comes in, right? Because error paths could easily, like, for example, with conversational design, I'll use that as an example. You have a chatbot, if you don't understand an intent, but we go into the competence area, right? Like, well, it's like, this is not as important, so as long as you get it 60% right, you know, but we don't get it right. Let's say we don't, right? Give the user options of what, like, other similar things could be or relevant things. And all of this could be used with AI, right? You can program it so that all like things get pulled in, conditionality. You get, like in the case with the chatbot, we have what we call quick replies, what some people call chips, right? So you can customize and have those conditional chips be different paths depending on what the intent that was being asked is, right? So that's by the way, that's a simple way of like, that's one recovery path. That's the simplest way. Now we're talking about like generative AI, right? User interfaces need to change. They need to. They need to be able to accommodate that. I know Midjourney has the lasso tool, so if you get an image and you just want to fix that one little hand, you know, you can lasso it, you know? And that's actually, I stole that example from Juliet Weiss this morning, so don't credit me, but she mentioned that. So I thought that was cool, right? So Midjourney has that way of editing pictures, right, as a recovery path, but that's because it's a visual. You know, it's generative design, right? But what about other tools? Does OpenAI have it, right? Maybe not as well, but maybe they're working on it. My prediction is maybe they are working on it and you have like things that you can kind of like suggest or tap, right? I'm assuming they would because that's a huge issue, right? It is a huge issue that has to be addressed. So I would say recovery paths start with knowing that you don't know everything. And then use case it. You just have to use cases a lot. Like, in fact, that's number one advice I give. Like, write down the important use cases, rank them, and then determine the error paths.
I love how you guys are talking about design process. So next question, and this is the last question, and then we'll take more from the audience. Josh, what impact generative AI will make in our design process? Now, we all know, you've been working with the double diamond and the five-point system for a while. Does that change? Does generative AI introduction of that changes our design process and the quality output of the design?
In terms of the process?
In terms of the process, yes.
I hope it doesn't, but it might. And if it does, then I hope as designers and researchers and architects and with a natural curious mind that we do question to make sure that it's serving the greater mankind and the greater good of all. That's a great question. Wow. I mean, I think there's going to be opportunities. What I will say is what I see happening in the not too distant future is an opportunity where we can accelerate some of that knowledge, and yet that hopefully will give us more opportunities to slow down in other areas. Mm-hmm. And what I mean by that, there's a law, it escapes me the name for a second, someone will probably remember it, but there's a law where like anything will expand into the space that it's given. And so in that discussion, you can find ways to optimize, some of the research, the analyses or whatnot, in ways that might be opportunities for us to work, maybe not in a linear relationship to your point, but we're still thinking on sort of an expand and contract. Maybe they're more smaller, maybe they're more micro diamonds in that relationship that help us become a bit more agile in that. But I believe that we should, as designers, also get a handle on the value of what that is, because my word of caution to so many of you out there tonight is, as you start to read through and you start to explore AI, and certainly the books that I've read, like Kai-Fu Lee's book on AI Superhuman, it really will start to have you realize that if we don't start to create better governance around it, and we don't start to get better rigor even within our craft, then it will quickly get away from us.
Awesome.
And that is my greatest concern for all of us is I want AI to be a tool that we can leverage and utilize and improve as designers because we take a hold of it, versus it essentially either taking our job or responsibilities or other opportunities from us to serve who we serve, which are users, which are human beings in this space. And I think that's where I'm cautiously optimistic that we will come out ahead, but I'm also very concerned about it at the same time.
Yeah. Thank you, Josh. Bethany, Addie, do you have any opinion on the design process?
Yeah, I don't believe it's going to change the design process. I would expect the double diamond to hold true. My expectation is that we are going to be expected to become subject matter experts and a lot more things faster. My biggest pet peeve is when people use stakeholder interviews to learn about the industry or the company in general. Like, that's not the piece. We now have tools for that in the form of ChatGPT. I would also expect to see the bar raised on all of our deliverables. Going in and asking and prompting for first drafts rather than starting with blank pages. Combining all of that industry research is huge. So I would expect us to be able to work faster and more efficiently, where our focus and value is on problem solving, critical thinking, building alignment and confidence in addition to those designs. Designs are meaningless if there's not someone willing to put their name behind it.
Mm-hmm. I really love that. I think I agree with both of you guys. I see both, like the process not changing, but then the micro changes, like the little diamonds within the diamond.
I love that.
Mostly, and this is more advice for people wanting to get into AI, if you're going to be a pioneer, you have to have lots of patience, right? You're going to want to move fast, and a lot of your cool ideas won't get done. But those cool ideas plant seeds, and those seeds become a reality, right? So for Truist, to give you guys snail's pace, I complain, but I'm happy, right? Ideas that we planned 3 years ago are finally coming to fruition, right? And keep in mind that we're a huge bank. We're not a tech company, right? So like we're not going to like focus on tech and do have the best devs or whatever. But with what we've got, we've been able to like succeed, right? Now that's one example. Super slow industry banking, right? But then you have other examples of people like wanting to move fast and now not having the patience to like wait for like the interviews and the research and this, which is fine. They could be impatient, but you have to have the patience to hold them off because you still need your time to create. And to your point, Bethany, if you can't put your name behind it, you know what I'm saying?
I think, in my opinion, I don't think process changes, but I think the users changes. We might be actually targeting the LLM models rather than actual users in order to design our mockups. Last question, before I open it up to the audience, I lied when I said last question. This is a fun one, so I think it should be okay. What's your favorite AI movie? It's not part of this list.
Minority Report.
All right, there you go.
Yeah, I'm going to go with Blade Runner.
Oh, Blade Runner, all right.
The City of Lost Children.
Oh, mine is Her. All right, thank you so much for the lovely discussion, and we'll open it up to the audience and one in the back.
Yeah, so actually her I was thinking about the whole time.
Yes, exactly.
Great insights. I do believe that AI is a tool, it's an assistant, a junior, a partner, kickoff, etc. At the same time, the other space that we'll play in, and it's already playing in, is forming a human relationship. So whether in her it becomes a friend, a lover, and we're seeing that, like for example, last I saw the keynote around Amazon and speech to speech and how it becomes more natural conversation. And I could see kids growing up with that and seeing it as a friend. Or on Snapchat with chatbots that are, whatever, have a character. Or Meta with celebrities and Mr. Beast becoming a chat. So what are your thoughts there on becoming more than just a tool, but again, people building relationships and seeing it as that?
Yeah, I think, so what Gen AI is doing is it's really allowing technology to help in new ways. So we're seeing the rise of virtual girlfriends. If you go out to services like Right Sonic, they make it really easy to train your own chatbots. So people are creating their own personas and friends. I think there's nothing wrong with having a brainstorming partner and having that relationship with technology. I think it needs to be obvious. It shouldn't ever be a secret. You shouldn't feel like you're interacting with a person, but in reality, you're interacting with a chatbot. And in producing those, I think there also needs to be a lot of safeguards and sort of roles in place. When I think about a lot of the AI discussion, and especially these personalization and sort of virtual friends or lovers or whatever we want to call them, it's still pretty far off, where the memory of LLMs and the amount of context that they're able to take in right now is pretty limited. Like, that's always changing. So it's that different experience, and by focusing on those sort of sensationalist pieces, we're missing the day-to-day regulations around how we do safeguard these pieces, and we make sure it's transparent and visible, and we're using the data safely. So
Yeah. I think that there is something called, thank you. When designing for such type of experiences where you have a virtual girlfriend or kind of a human-like interaction, I think as a designer, there is a human psychology is that we don't want to interact with something else which is exactly like a human. We want to know that that's an AI. We want to know that's a robot. I think if you end up finding that you're actually interacting with a robot exactly like human, I think you're going to start to dislike that experience, and I think you're going to distance yourself from that. I think it's called uncanny valley. It's kind of a term which is being used. You can Google that too. Uncanny valley generative AI. Look it up. It's a concept where we don't want to design something which is exactly like us because it's just, we're not interested anymore. So designing something which is like a virtual girlfriend, I think there is one in China, there's multiple services which kind of offers a virtual concert where a young girl kind of goes and dances on the stage and everyone loves it. It's kind of host concert and they sell tickets online on that. So, anybody else has a response to that?
No, I mean, yeah, in terms of relationships, all great points. I mean, my only feedback is just making sure that we're doing it for the wellness of anybody that it serves, right? Virtual girlfriends, those relationships, those can all be, they can all serve that relationship, but there can also be concerns where what does that do if that's either taken away, there's a loss, if there's a gap, and then what does that do within that human relationship that doesn't move our society forward? That's only my response there. As long as it's serving the greater good as well as the individual, then I'm good with it.
Watch her.
That's such a good point. So I'm a suit. I'm not a banker, but let me pretend I am. I always think about regulation, right? So California, I think, is about to pass or is passing some sort of if it's a bot, you got to say it's a bot, right? So whether I want to or not, that's not up to me anymore. It's now regulation, right? So that makes my life easy. I'm like, if it's against the law, can't do it. I'm at a bank. Take me out of the bank, that might be different, right? And in that case, I want to give a use case where our assistant people thought was a real human, and we got in so much trouble. We got in so much trouble. We had to actually label it like not a human, to let people know. right? Now, am I opposed to personas and stuff? I don't know. I don't know. But I will tell you that when I design system personas, which is slightly different than like personas as we use in UX, right? UX, we have personas for research and all that. But in system personas, you're actually creating the tone and the voice, the vernacular, like you're creating the personality of the robot, right? Every single client that asked me to do one always said, make sure to let them know they're not human, right? That was a caveat, like a bullet point, right? So sometimes it's as little as a label, like not a human, you know? Or sometimes it's as much as like, I know I'm cool, but remember, I'm a bot. So I would say like, if the future has that, I'm there with you, right? Like if it goes that direction, let's be ethical about it. Let's not try to use it to manipulate people, because then this is the problem with this. If it's too human, then all of a sudden you can scale out every single fraud scenario. All of a sudden you can con people out of money, especially older, vulnerable people. I mean, already generative AI is doing this, right? Warm GPT, I don't want to encourage you guys to go there, but I'm just saying it exists now. So if it exists now, if we enable that, that's when we're going to spiral into deeper darkness, right? Uncanny Valley, a different angle. But yeah, so I'm just more like, if it's illegal, I can't do it. Like that's my point of view. But also, if it becomes legal to do it, I'm still cool as long as we serve humanity, right?
All right, awesome. Yes.
I was just going to ask your opinion on what's known as model collapse. Have you heard that phrase? Yeah, okay. Model collapse for everybody else is basically we're training the AIs on what humans have produced. Well, AIs are generating so much content now that the AIs are training themselves on AI-generated content. And so it's basically like making a copy of a copy of a copy on the old copying machines. And the problem is that once an error gets into the stack, then it just propagates really rapidly. For example, the one about skin cancer. Have you heard? Yeah, that one. It's basically when they're training the AI to detect skin cancer. In the pictures where people have skin cancer, they have a ruler to like show how big the skin cancer is. So the AI goes, if there's a ruler in the picture, you've got skin cancer. Yeah, exactly. So for design on model collapse, how do you guys feel like we should be addressing this? Because AI moves so fast and humans only can do so much.
I think that goes back to the intentional design and once again thinking about that full path to value. So right now, one of the big advances with Gen AI and ChatGPT specifically is they enabled effectively God mode. So up until recently, all the information it was trained on was curated by OpenAI from a couple years ago, right, when they trained it. So it's effectively trained on the internet as it existed 3 years ago, right? So now, where they are allowing those connections to go out into the internet, right, and get real-time data, you're getting, it's more applicable for news and current events that way. And that's where, I don't know if you saw in the news a couple months ago, they talked about ChatGPT's accuracy and the quality of its service going down. And that's exactly what was happening, is you had all of these questions, all of these prompts, all of these writers using Gen AI to publish content that are starting to form those new writing models. Now that the models are going out, you're also seeing companies are the same way that we used to put, or I guess still do, put tracking pixels on websites, right, to track users. Companies can effectively put a blocker where it says to LLMs, do not access this content when you're in that sort of real-time mode. So now you're taking all of those realistically high-quality curated content sources out of the picture, and you're pulling in all of your Reddits and
false content coming in.
Medium articles and false content coming in. This is all not just related to Gen AI. The same thing happens in the AI world. They call it drifts and shifts. So when you're training your models, you have training data, and when your real-world context no longer matches, your accuracy goes down. So that's where really making sure that you're monitoring these models going forward, that you're always evolving them, and once again, you're treating them like a product, the same way that we treat our digital products, because if you don't, you will inevitably have model collapse. And as you think about those retraining cycles, I think the importance of that training data is going to be what really starts to set different companies apart.
I also think that someone needs to be a subject matter expert to curate them. If AI is generating something and AI says my confidence rate is 97%, but it's completely bad article, a subject matter expert needs to reject that article so that the machine learning can then learn about, why was this a bad content, even though my confidence rate was 97%. Any other questions? Got a lot of questions. Yes, Molly.
Yeah, it was along those same lines that it seems like with AI, it's more important than ever to practice critical thinking.
Oh, yeah.
And what can design do, for users to really exercise more critical thinking?
Just question it in terms of like what can designers do with it, or how they want to possibly.
Prompting the user to question it.
Yeah, you want to have a certain amount of healthy skepticism, but there was actually it's an interesting you bring that up because there was a recent report where this came out by BCG Consulting Group, and it talked about how they did a couple different tests. They did basically a group of people that did they baselined it, just were creating creativity, solving skills in that space, and then they took another test group, and then they tied them in with like ChatGPT and whatnot, other generative AI, and they actually found that they did, I think it was something like 23% better in terms of the scoring. And I don't know how all that scoring worked out, but they were just more efficient, effective, more creative in that space. But on the flip side of that, though, on any type of like business analysis, critical thinking relationships, to your point, that team did worse, the one that actually was using and leveraging generative AI. There's still some inherent challenges within that. Whether it is an ethical factor as to whether we would even want to do this, those are things that we explore. There was I can't remember, a few years ago, there was a paper clip research that, I don't know if anybody remembers. It was like they basically ran a scenario through a model and said, if you could make as many paper clips in the world as possible, the outcomes as to what it recommended was basically killing off 2/3 of humankind or whatnot. Something crazy. It just didn't understand the ethics of that. So I think there's a critical analysis relationship to that AI still struggles with. And if we can get ahead of it, I think we are all for the better. If we don't, we're in a world of hurt. And what I will leave you with on that is I remember Kai-Fu Lee saying that if we take the next 5 years, because they asked him about the dangers of AI, and he said, if we take the next 5 years and really start thinking about pragmatic ways to create governance and policies and procedures around that, we're going to be okay. Otherwise, he started getting worried. Caveat that was 4 years ago. So we are quickly, I think, running into an area where we have to be cautious about how we're using it.
We'll take one more question. Sorry, guys, it's already 7:30. Yes. Either one of you.
In terms of being like a research assistant, do you ever see any of the tools, like whether it's Atlas, AI, or Dovetail, or any of those, like being able to take your transcripts and do qualitative interviews, and instead of doing all the like inductive coding or deductive coding, getting some of those insights quicker? And then do you also foresee AI maybe helping evaluate the accessibility instead of manually doing the form method like when Cynthia taught
Are you saying that we're just gonna take over the research job? No.
Just to get it done quicker.
No,
You
absolutely.
have 10 interviews, and at the fall, it's great. You know,
Yes.
your teams have, 4 people on a team, and you're each, analyzing 5 interviews or whatever it is, but you're like the only researcher.
Right.
You're like, oh my god, I have 60 hours of interviews. I'm just
No, yeah, absolutely.
I'll
Yeah, go for it.
I just had a debate online, and a researcher's like, I would never use AI. I'm like, oh. All right, fine.
A researcher said that?
A UX researcher.
Okay.
Now, keep in mind that the context was one of my friends was saying, oh, you should try Phantom. It's a nice transcribing skill. And he never mentioned even using it for UX research at all. So she just kind of like took offense to it. But then it got me thinking, like, no, there's tools out there that currently do what you're saying. And it's like such a great question to ask because they're not perfect yet. So are they ready for prime time? Maybe not. But if you train them right, and that's the key here, like purposeful, right? Like purposeful intention, have human oversight, and additionally have a human train it, like basically a digital twin, but for cognitive thinking, right? So we have digital twins for voice, we have digital twins for visual, we have digital twins for whatever. We're yet to come up with well, maybe some people are currently as we speak where I can't say, but cognitive twin, right? So if I train a model to think how I think and synthesize data the way I do, then my ongoing, every time I do that, the next time it's going to get easier. So like by the time I get to the 10th time I train it, it'll be a lot faster and it'll be trained in my voice and the way I think, right? Because the problem here is not so much like, can AI do it? Yes, it can, right? It's like, will it do it right?
Mm-hmm.
Will it do it like a human? And specifically, if you get paid a lot of money because people love the way you think, right? Basically duplicate yourself, right? But you also have to make sure that you have oversight over it. So there's always going to be that element. Like, I guess what I see the jobs shifting from less of like tactical work and more strategic work in terms of executing that. Because AI can take a lot of admin stuff off the researcher's plate.
I think it's not only research, but design too. I don't know how many of you have seen it, but Figma is launching their AI tool called Genius. And Genius can actually learn from a designer's pattern on how they're actually designing like a box and a text and a box and an image and a text. And then Genius can actually replicate that and create a system for you. Cannot wait for it to come out so get hands on it. You can join the waiting list, genius.ui. Research and design. So I love what you said is, I think our job is not going to be a tactical designer or a researcher where we are putting pixels together, but it's more strategic on aligning ourselves with business goals and what we're trying to achieve and think at a higher level. I think AI is just going to help the industry to up level and insist on higher standards for all of us to kind of think a little bit more strategic and go up level higher. And with that, would like to end this session and want to just say thank you so much for the audience here and thank you our panelists for a great discussion.